Hey ho, dear ones. I was meeting with one of my soul clients, Olivia, the other day, and she was like, Allison, it's just all so weird. It's so weird. I hesitate to even tell you. And oh my gosh, I hear this all the time, like all the time. Allison, it sounds so weird. I think one of my biggest roles in life is to confirm back to my soul clients that which would they know to be true, but it just seems so weird. How could it be true? Because it's all just so weird. And the origins of the word weird is actually intuitive. But the powers that be at a certain point in our history changed the meaning of the word from intuitive to weird to help us, indeed, us weird folks, to help us thwart our intuitive gifts. So today's episode is really devoted to it is just all so weird. Why is it so weird? And why it's so important to share the weirdness and how to share our weirdness in the right way. And certainly by weirdness, I mean the spiritual occurrences and experience that are happening to us that just feel so out of the normal, because that's really how we understand weird to be in today's context. It's different. It's not something you hear about every day. And that is really what a spiritual experience is. So why don't we go ahead and just get right to it? In today's episode, I reveal why our spiritual experiences can feel weird, why it's so important to share your weird experiences and the right way to share so that you can integrate your experiences the right way. We'll end on an invitation that will have you stepping into your role as soul-guided leader on the leading edge of consciousness. You're so needed right now, by the way, and embracing all the wonderful weirdness that entails. So please, my dear ones, stay with me until the end. Hello, Soul Guide Circle. That is the name of this global and growing community of soul-guided leaders and entrepreneurs. In the Soul Guide Circle, we are using our spiritual gifts to grow prosperous, heart-led businesses that are on the leading edge of consciousness. Find a link to join our closed Facebook group at AllisonScammell.com or in the show notes. So today we're talking about weird spiritual experiences. And we'll just go ahead and define weird as out of the ordinary or not part of the normal discourse. But, really at its root, weird does just mean intuitive, connected to the divine. But the reason why our spiritual experience can feel so weird is because spirituality has been scrubbed from a lot of mainstream systems. You don't learn about anything spiritual at school, really. Some more progressive schools can teach you a little bit about being in the body, relaxation, and connecting to the intuition. I don't even know if they use the word intuition, but that would be a pretty progressive school. My daughter was working with a coach to help her with her social emotional development, and this coach happened to be spiritual and was also an energy healer. And the coach recommended that the best thing for Freya is if she went to the class and led a discussion on emotions and how to manage your emotions and understand your energy. Well, to my surprise, the school said yes. So she did, and she actually I have videos of it, you guys. Kind of brings tears to my eyes. She had the whole class of these, and this was a few years ago. So they were like all 6-year-olds. They were all meditating, and she was teaching them how to feel their energy. And the kids were so excited. And to be honest, the teacher was also really excited. I could tell she was really into it. And it was just like we were so proud, and it was this amazing success. And Freya got to lead some of the demonstrations, and Freya was so proud. And when it was over, I was like, oh my God, this is just so amazing. Like, I can't believe that this happened in a pretty traditional school. It's a traditional Dutch school that Freya goes to. Well, of course, I had to have, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say, of course, somebody had to rain on the parade, and that's not the right mindset to take. But Unfortunately, one of the parents complained and accused this coach of teaching the children Buddhism. And these folks were devout Christians. And first of all, there was nothing about this session that had anything to do with Buddhism. Although, yeah, Buddhism has, connecting to energy and relaxation and meditation. But there was nothing about the session that was, trying to convert the children to Buddhism. But these parents complained, and then it all just got shut down. This is what happens. Spirituality in our mainstream systems gets shut down. Hollywood tries to talk about it in movies and shows. Typically, the spiritual person is a weirdo in that sort of kooky, goofy, sometimes deranged, making no sense. But you watch this. Hey, listen up here. You watch. In the movies and shows you see on Netflix and Disney and stuff, where they have like the psychic, right? Like, let's say, if you like to watch detective series, they always do the episode where the psychic senses there's a dead body somewhere or who the killer is. And the psychic is always a weirdo in this sense of like, she's kooky, out there, not making much sense. And then there'll always be a couple detectives that says, this is quackery. You can't trust this psychic. She's a quack. She's nuts, right? The spiritual person is almost always portrayed as nuts. But listen, almost always the spiritual psychic person is right at the end. Her information was actually correct, right? If you liked the series Ted Lasso, remember Rebecca, who was very, very skeptical of psychics and very belittling of them, which is what Hollywood does. They belittle the spiritual people and practices and insights. She went to her mother's psychic, who her mother believed in, but then her mother was also portrayed to be a little kooky and out there. And this psychic predicted that she was going to find love in this certain way, and it was very specific. And so there was a lot of talk about this woman's a quack, I don't believe in this stuff, but then in the end, the psychic predicted everything. So I invite you, as you're watching shows and movies, and there is a spiritual type psychic healer shaman person, it is really likely they will be portrayed as wacky. The protagonist will say, I don't believe in that stuff. But then in the end, everything they said or did will end up having been right. So the reason why it feels so weird is because in our mainstream systems, media, structures, it's not talked about. And it's typically portrayed as weird. It makes people uncomfortable, so it all gets shut down. Shut it down. And this gets us to why it's so important to share our weird spiritual experiences. And that's because our traditional channels are never going to talk about it. So we have to. We have to talk about the truth of our energy, of our existence, of our spiritual gifts, of our connection with the divine, of the quantum field, of everything that's truly happening on planet. We have to talk about it. We have to share these weird experiences because they're not weird, they're true, they're real. Now, sometimes we might have a spiritual experience that we don't understand, and at the time of it, we don't get it 100% right. Oh my gosh, I can definitely say that about my near-death experience. I had very, very little understanding of what was happening to me at the time of my NDE, and now I feel like I'm getting a bigger understanding, but I'm still not there yet. These big, air quotes, weird spiritual experiences can take years, decades to integrate. And this integration is another vital reason why we need to share our spiritual experiences, because it's in the sharing and having a safe witness to our experience. So the person you are sharing it to is safe. It doesn't mean that they're 100% on board with what you're saying. They don't need to be. So for example, if you have a spouse who's kind of spiritual, but not really, and kind of is like, I'm not so sure about this, and you share this big experience with them and they're like, whoa, I'm not so sure about that, at least can they be safe to just listen and not say, whoa, that was really strange. So I know you thought that happened to you, but there's no way it really did. That reaction of shutting down, that's what we need to avoid when we share. That unsafe audience, that unsafe person. So we're not looking for the people who see the world exactly the way we do, and we're only finding the person who sees spirituality in the exact same way. If you find that person, that's great, but you don't need to. You just need to find that person or those people who are safe, who to receive and to be the compassionate witness, the loving, accepting. Doesn't mean they believe everything you believe. They don't have to. They're just they accept this experience. They accept that this is what you perceived to have experienced. And it's really important to find those accepting people and share your experiences. And for the big spiritual experiences that feel really out there, I recommend starting with a small group, one person. And it's in the sharing, in the talking about it, that you will start to understand what it is that exactly happened to you. You will start to integrate the spiritual downloads you received, the healing, the insights, the know-how. Maybe you got some psychic visions of what's to come. If you keep it all inside of you, even if you're just journaling it out, you will integrate some of it, but never to the degree as if you're speaking it aloud to another human being who is accepting and safe of your experiences. Ra, the founder of human design, received the human design system in a 7 to 8 day transmission, where all day, all night, he was getting these downloads. He called it the voice. I think it was source. He was getting these downloads from source about what is the human design system and how can humanity use it to better understand our unique energy templates. And then he says it took him 16 years to integrate that. And he didn't integrate it by meditating on it for 16 years. He started to talk about it. He talked and he talked and he talked and he shared and he found his audiences. And before long, people were you started to get some followers, people who were interested in this new modality. And it was taking ancient things, but it was putting a new spin on ancient modalities that had been around forever, because they started to see results from this human design system he had received. But it took 16 years for that initial integration. And as he was teaching, he got more and more integration. And then he realized at a certain point that as we evolved to higher consciousness, the human design chart was going to evolve, and we were going to have an evolved way of seeing human design, which is happening now, and it's really going to happen in 2027 when the human design chart evolves, when it mutates. But he passed away before he could get to that point. So other human design teachers out there like Karen Curry Parker are doing the work that he never got to finish doing. It was passed on. These divine insights, they may start with you, but as you talk about it and as you get people who are, let's say, aligning to the insights that you're receiving, then they take these insights and then they, create their own experience with it. The divine insights get passed on. Again, another reason why it's so important to share. But there is sharing the right way. And the right way I've already talked about is finding the right audience. Because if you share these vulnerable spiritual breakthroughs and downloads and experiences with someone who's not safe, they will tell you to shut it down, and it will be hard not to, because we shared something vulnerable to someone maybe you thought you trusted, and they said, well, this sounds like poppycock, then it's highly likely you will shut it down. And we've all had this experience at one time or another. And then there is the divine timing of it, right? So if you've had a big spiritual experience, I recommend, and it's likely that the divine timing to start talking about it with your close friends and close loved ones, and that inner circle will be right away, so you can start integrating it right away. But then if you want to start sharing it in your business, in your work, writing a book, doing podcast episodes about it, those types of things, sharing it with larger and larger audiences, that's when you really want to be mindful to the divine timing of when this spiritual experience or insight is ready to be shared. Because if it's shared too soon, it probably won't land for folks. And if you hold on to it too long, there's also going to be some alignment that's not really there that will prevent the insight from truly finding the people who need to hear it on a soul level. And we've all been out of alignment with the divine timing of sharing insights. So it's not to say if we've missed the alignment, we've missed it. Not at all. It's about awareness and feedback. And just noticing, I had this big spiritual experience. I've shared it with all my friends. I now want to share it with my audience. Is now the time? And if you get that yes, it might feel scary, right? Because it might feel very vulnerable. But this is your higher self inviting you to push your edges, confront your fears, the fear of they might think I'm crazy, they might think I'm weird, and share it anyway. And for the purposes of this episode, I have so many weird spiritual experiences. I can't even just countless that I don't share for the very reason of people will think that's cuckoo. So for the purposes of this episode, I want to share a weird spiritual experience that I've never shared before in public like this. There are just so many, but the one that higher self is calling me to is, this is pretty weird. So the universe is organized, that's not the right word, appears in dimensions. So we live mostly in the third dimension when we're in our really human self. And you might hear spiritual people talking about the fifth dimension. That's a higher vibrational place when you're really connected to the divine. It goes up to the 12th dimension, but it's really hard to hit anything above the 7th dimension in human form, although it is possible. So when you're in human form, you tend to be, in the lower dimensions. And as we're evolving to higher consciousness, that's really in essence what it means. It means being able to have a human experience, being in our human suits, but being able to access these higher dimensions, which has expanded consciousness, a deeper connection to the divine. And then there are the lower dimensions, the first dimension and the second dimension. And this is where people can go when they have a lot of addiction, tons and tons of trauma. And it can also be a place where a soul can go after it's crossed over if it had a very traumatic life. One of the things I do that I don't advertise is I help a lot of crossed over souls to transition. Usually it's a client coming to me who's had a loved one cross over, and they ask me to help this loved one transition. And so what I often find with crossed over souls who, let's say, have struggled with addiction their whole life, and we're maybe at a quite still addicted place of a substance at the point of crossing over. For example, maybe they passed away from an overdose. I will find their soul down in the second dimension. Now remember, there's no lost souls, and this soul is going to heal its way back, and they're going to be fine. They just have some, healing to do. And that's part of the transition process, is helping them to heal enough so that they can reconnect to their divine guidance team, and their divine guidance team can help them transition to something better. In these low dimensions, the first and second dimension, there is actually a dark energy that is like the Grim Reaper. And I think this dark energy is where the mythology of the Grim Reaper actually comes from. And he, for me, it's a masculine energy. So I'll just use the pronoun he. He sort of is the overseer of the crossed over souls who have dipped down into these lower dimensions. And this is really like kind of, I think, what hell is supposed to be. But we've all been down. We've all had times down in these lower dimensions. You're not lost down there. You're not being punished. It's just a place where some crossed over souls can go when they have lots of trauma that they're holding on to, that they haven't healed yet, but they will heal, and they will evolve to something higher. So this is just a stop on the evolutionary growth of the soul. And most all souls eventually make a stop in these lower dimensions. So this Grim Reaper figure, and as I see him in my mind's eye, he looks like the Grim Reaper. That's how I see. He's non-physical. It's non-physical consciousness or energy. Is it consciousness? Yeah. It's very low vibrational, dark, but it's not like this Grim Reaper energy is not as dark as a lot of other energies I've encountered, because he's kind of protecting, in a way, these crossed over souls that are in these low dimensions, but at the same time, he kind of likes to keep them there. So I wouldn't call him an energy of light by any stretch of the imagination. But, okay, I told you guys the story was going to be weird. So when I go to hotels, I always clear the energy first, because I'm extremely energy sensitive. And if there's any dark energy present, which most hotels have, some sort of dark and unsavory energy kind of hanging around, especially old hotels, I can't sleep, and I just find it annoying. So I will, if I know I'm going somewhere, and especially if I know if it's an older hotel, I will clear the energy. But sometimes dark energy has a really close hold. They've really sort of taken over a hotel. So if you've ever had a terrible night's sleep at a hotel, it's likely that there was a lot of dark energy present that was mucking up with your sleep. So what I have done on many occasions is I call up the Grim Reaper and I cut a deal. And I say to this energy, look, I'm going to be at this hotel for the next 4 nights. I'll cut a deal with you that I'll clear the hotel out for 4 nights, get my good night's sleep. And then when I check out, I will leave this hotel alone and the dark energy can return. And I've always then had, Grim Reaper agrees. I have 4 days of clear, clean, high vibe energy in the hotel. And then when I leave, I kind of don't look back. But this is why sharing spiritual occurrences is so important, because just as I'm sharing the story to you, which is really a story I don't talk about, I'm realizing I shouldn't do that. I should clear the hotels for, sometimes places need to be re-cleared. So I certainly won't be able to re-clear all the places I stay, but I shouldn't do that anymore. And the reason why I cut the deal is because sometimes the dark energy will just keep coming back, and I'll have to re-clear. But so if I cut this deal, I can say, okay, let's say for 4 days, we have a clear space, and then you can come back. So I'm gonna just ask Source, like, is there a way to handle those situations better? And I'm getting a yes. So maybe this is helpful for you if you're ever staying in a hotel and you want to clear the space so it's clear, clean, and high vibe, but you want to leave something good behind. so that future guests of that hotel don't have terrible night sleeps. So this is interesting. Source is saying we're evolving to a place where we don't need to cut deals with the Grim Reaper anymore. And I can just clear a hotel every morning. And I do that anyway of my own house. I clear my own energy every morning. I cleared my house. I clear my neighborhood. I sort of clear on out, clear as much of the planet as I can every morning as part of my morning practice. And that's just something we have the access to do now, even in a hotel, which may have a more intense dark energy that takes more energy to clear. You don't need to cut those deals anymore. You can just clear out the dark energy. So then certainly if you don't have someone in there re-clearing and re-clearing, it may return. It will likely return, but it sure does make it a lot more easeful to just clear the space so that you can have a good night's sleep. So that is me sharing a story that I don't often share, but in doing so, I got some clarity that I appreciate, and maybe you received something from that. Now, you don't need to believe that there's a Grim Reaper, or, you don't have to take on all of these, this is truth, but maybe it activated in something in you about clearing your space, clearing your energy. Maybe there was something you needed from that. Maybe you've also communicated with the Grim Reaper and didn't realize it. So maybe you call it, you have a different name for that dark energy. I was called to share that story, so there's some of you out there that needed some aspect of it. And this is why we need to share these spiritual occurrences that we don't hear about in the mainstream channels. And that's really what we mean by weird. We're not hearing about it the way we should, so we have to talk about it. And let's make spiritual experiences mainstream. We can do it. The more we talk about it, and the more it opens people up to this world, to these possibilities, the more it's just gonna be normal, part of our experience. And we get to that by talking about it, by sharing. And it can feel scary, and you can have that sense of like, oh, everybody's going to think this is really weird, this is really strange. But if you feel like you're speaking to the right audience at the right time, face the fear and share anyway. Which gets us nicely to our invitation for this week, is to consider a spiritual occurrence that you've been keeping inside because you were afraid how others would perceive it. Check in with your higher self. Who are you calling me to share this story with? And is now the time? And if you get, yes, now is the time, find that audience or find that platform if you're being called to share it on social media or you're being called to share it with a friend. Find whoever that audience is and share and see how expanded you feel after and how it helped you to better understand and integrate the magic of the spiritual experience itself. And I would love to know what spiritual experiences you have encountered that you have held back on sharing. Send me a DM on Instagram or Facebook. Share the story with me. Email me at allison@allisonscampbell.com. I would love to hear about it. And if you received something special from this episode, head on over to wherever it is you listen, hit subscribe, leave a rating and review, and I will read your amazing words on the air. And as always, until next time, may your soul guide the way.